Next slide, Cole. There we go. All right, and so what can you do next and how can you engage with this project? So you can explore the resources on the websites. So you can see the links that are there, and I'm sure that we can share the links also in the chat with you. Explore the What Works pages and toolkits, for example, labor market assessment guides, youth centers, and youth engagement and measurement toolkits. Register on those same websites. You receive notifications about content based on your interests, contribute your own resources, announce your events. We also welcome you to join a community of practice. As I noted, there are gender including social norms and a youth subgroup, youth engagement, business entrepreneurship and private sector engagement, and forthcoming COPs for higher education, engagement and transformation, youth system strengthening, as well as the MENA group, which is also in Arabic, if that is of interest. And we welcome you to subscribe, to our newsletters. With that, I would like to introduce and hand over to Dorothy Stumke, who is a senior program officer with the City Foundation, where she oversees signature global partnerships across the foundation's 3 focus areas of youth economic opportunities, financial inclusion, and community solutions. Dorothy led the City Foundation's effort on this roadmap, coordinating with both Youth Employment Funders Group and Plan International. I'll now pass it over to Dorothy to provide us with a brief background context on how this roadmap came to be and City Foundation's rationale for supporting it. Over to you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I want to thank Making Sense for hosting this global launch webinar and thank Plan International, ASIC, and USAID for their participation today. I also would like to thank the Youth Employment Funders Group and Yamila Simonovsky for their guidance and support on this project over the past year. As Christy shared, I'm a senior program officer with the City Foundation, and I wanted to provide just a bit of context as to why City Foundation commissioned this report and how this report was actually conceptualized. The City Foundation is committed to the economic empowerment of low-income communities around the world, and our philanthropy carries a strong focus on supporting diverse youth. Over the last 7 years, we've invested nearly $200 million through our flagship Pathways to Progress initiative, partnering with local community organizations that are addressing the challenge of persistent global unemployment. In November 2020, we pledged an additional $100 million to Pathways with an intentional focus on doubling down efforts to reach diverse and underrepresented youth globally. In particular, in the United States, we have a very strong focus on reaching communities of color. So we were very excited in 2019 at the Youth Employment Funder Group's annual meeting when there was a discussion about the need for a greater level of understanding about how funders can better support meaningful youth engagement in their investments. The Youth Employment Funders Group, the YEFG, is a network of over 20 multilateral organizations and international donors, including private foundations, working together to generate and share more and better evidence-based knowledge on what works in the field of youth employment. As a YEFG steering committee member, the City Foundation offered to commission this very report, and after issuing a request for proposals in summer 2019, Plan International was awarded a grant by the City Foundation to take forward this research. When we set out on this journey in 2019, we had no idea just how timely this contribution could perhaps be to the youth employment field today. I think all of us have seen just how the pandemic revealed both its deep and disproportionate effect on young people, from unemployment to racial equity issues and access. Youth are the ones who continue to be disproportionately impacted. But we've also witnessed the power that young people have in leveraging their voice for change. They've been vocal about their demands for racial justice and gender equality with the emergence and reassertion of the Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements. And it's shown us as funders how youth have solutions to the things that are impacting them and that they deserve to be listened to. The past year has certainly accelerated the City Foundation's journey to meaningfully engage youth. We will continue to amplify the incredible success stories brought to us by our partners of young entrepreneurs who have launched businesses that are creating solutions in their communities, to sharing how our partners are leveraging young feedback loops and engaging alumni to improve future iterations of programs we support. But we know that we are only scratching the surface and that there are so many more learnings out there for us to grab hold of. And that is why we funded this paper, and that is what today is about. How can we as a community of practice be authentic partners and really listen to and incorporate what youth need into the very interventions that are supposed to position them for long-term success? We are all on this journey together, and the responsibility to take an inclusive approach with this future generation could not be more important today. Our hope is that the guidance shared through this roadmap delivers to the field the inspiration that could help define the next generation of youth employment programming and disrupt the long-standing patterns of exclusion that have left the voice of youth behind for too long. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Making Sense, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Here. Perfect. And with that, I will go ahead and move us to the next part of the presentation. I'd like to introduce Kate, and I apologize, Kate, is it Ez?
It's Aziz, it's not an easy
Aziz,
one. Yeah.
Thank you. Kate is the director of the Youth and Economic Empowerment Technical Practice at Plan International US. As part of her role, she works in partnership with youth to design, deliver, and evaluate a range of programming, including formal and informal employment, and as well as establishing youth advisory boards to ensure meaningful youth engagement is an integrated approach across the organization. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Kate. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thanks very much, Cole. I'm really pleased to be here today and to walk this group through our roadmap. I will provide a high-level summary of the components of the roadmap, and then we can certainly go into further detail in Q&A. So next slide, please. So the importance of acknowledging the role of youth and the need to engage them in decisions that affect their lives is clear and is becoming more universally accepted. A common question that is continued to be asked is what it really means to meaningfully engage youth, and perhaps more importantly, how you can begin this process. However, there's not a lot of research that can help answer these questions. And furthermore, there's no consensus on what meaningful youth engagement really is. So as a response, this roadmap answers the who, when, why, and how questions when it comes to meaningfully engaging in youth employment programs. And it also outlines how key stakeholders can begin and sustain the process of meaningfully engaging youth in youth employment programs. To guide the roadmap, the Youth Employment Funders Group came up with two important research questions, which you see on the screen now. And they focus on identifying the key phases of the project lifecycle where youth engagement can be integrated and what concrete steps stakeholders can take to strengthen or start their journeys. Next slide, please. To inform the roadmap, we took a multi-tiered approach to our methodology. We conducted a literature review, which was used to identify the gaps in our knowledge and understanding of youth engagement and youth employment strategies and programs, and guide the development of our data collection tools, which focused on identified gaps and to establish a conceptual framework and definition of meaningful youth engagement. We also conducted a series of key informant interviews with 15 funders, 10 implementing organizations, and 10 KIIs with youth leaders and youth organization representatives. These young people were chosen because they possessed considerable youth employment program experience. In addition, we conducted a series of focus group discussions. They were 1.5-hour virtual discussions, which collected insights from youth around the world. And these youth, again, have direct youth employment program experience. We also completed a 55-question survey, which covered demographics, meaningful youth engagement, and youth-specific employment programs. We received 284 responses, and they were analyzed and compared with findings from other research activities to determine the extent to which primary quantitative and qualitative data echoed or departed from one another. We also had a validation webinar. So as a participatory assessment practice, this webinar aimed to verify information that was collected from research participants and determine the resonance of the findings to the roadmap's intended audience. And lastly, we held roundtable discussions. They were 1.5-hour discussions that covered the experience of funders, implementers, and youth in promoting meaningful youth engagement in youth employment programs and strategies. So the process for defining meaningful youth engagement included engagement with the project advisory group and the youth advisory panel, the comprehensive literature review that I just mentioned, as well as and the robust methodology that accompanied it. All of those were used to help form the definition of meaningful youth engagement. So what is meaningful youth engagement? After we reviewed the literature and analyzed the recurring themes, we came up with the following definition that's used to guide different parts of the roadmap. The definition states, under enabling conditions, youth representatives actively participate throughout the program lifecycle and enter into youth-adult partnerships that empower youth and may contribute to positive and long-standing labor market outcomes. So we recognize at first glance, this definition seems like a lot, but if we break it down, we're aiming to highlight youth as the main drivers of youth employment programs rather than as passive beneficiaries. We also note a few conditions we have to keep in mind, such as having an enabling environment, adequate representation, and shared value partnerships. We'll dive into all of those a little bit deeper when we get into the framework for meaningful youth engagement. So the next slide provides an overview of how the report is structured or how the roadmap is structured. It's divided into several interconnected sections. So the introduction helps set the stage for the entire roadmap and provides context on how the roadmap came to be. The research methodology and key findings section outlines the methodology used, which then directed the approach of the roadmap. And it also showcases a summary of data collection findings, which inform the following parts of the paper. The section titled Defining Meaningful Youth Engagement in Youth Employment Programs provides the critical definition of what meaningful youth engagement is and a framework that operationalizes the concept in youth employment programs. This section benefits a wide variety of stakeholders, including the private sector and youth partners, as it identifies the different ways that young people can be engaged, as well as the value of engaging young people in youth employment programs. The roadmap to meaningful youth engagement and action outlines the key activities that guide the development of funding opportunities, which result in mainstreaming meaningful youth engagement in youth employment programs. And this section really targets funders who want to take the necessary steps to integrate meaningful youth engagement in their programming. And finally, we have a supplementary information and reading section, which guides all the readers throughout the roadmap in different ways. There are callouts, case studies, quotes, and additional databases with detailed information for those that are interested in seeing how that helped inform the research. Next slide, please. So the framework for operationalizing the meaningful youth engagement includes 5 pillars, and I'll walk through these quickly. They each include the definition as well as key criteria, the indicators we can use to measure the impact, as well as the intended outcome. So the first is focused on fair, inclusive, and context-specific youth representation, noting how essential it is for a meaningful engagement process. The kind of representation promotes unity among all young people involved in youth employment programs, with the selection of youth representatives considered to be important by all funder and implementer informants, Specifically, 70% of youth key informants raise the importance of selecting truly representative youth to participate in these intergenerational partnerships. Some of the key criteria for this pillar include fairness, inclusion, and context specificity. So that by that we mean the specific circumstances of the program youth population target, so education, employment, income, location, their refugee or migration status, that they are reflected in the pool of youth that are driving the youth employment programs. An illustrative indicator for this pillar would be the proportion of youth among the participants in the youth employment program that are disaggregated by age and gender, who are young women, young people with disabilities, youth who identify as ethnic minority or migrant, openly LGBTQIA+, youth from rural or remote areas, low-income youth, young people who have a secondary or tertiary education, those who've received formal or non-formal education, and youth who are not students in academic or training programs or who are unemployed. The outcome that we intend to see here is that young people targeted by a youth employment program, including the most vulnerable, are represented in all their diversity by an inclusive selection of youth for participation in the program. The second pillar focuses on the environment, the enabling environment, because environments matter, especially in enabling various forms of engagement. The literature, particularly that from UNICEF and the WHO, shares how these environments should be safe, accountable, and supported by certain factors, such as youth safeguarding policies and mechanisms, gender and disability responsive safe spaces, youth-friendly working methods, youth-centered resources, and a credible audience. Some of the finding from our key informant interviews, focus groups, and the survey noted the need for broad organizational and institutional support and suggested the importance of conducive environments for meaningful youth engagement. 50% of youth and 40% of funder respondents highlighted the constraints brought on by dealing with administrative procedures in terms of creating this environment. The key criteria under this pillar are that we're creating safe, conducive, and accountable spaces. An indicator for this pillar would be the percentage of youth who report that the methods used in youth employment interventions were inclusive and youth-friendly. The proposed outcome is that program youth, including the most vulnerable among them, enjoy safe, conducive, and accountable engagement conditions throughout the entire program lifecycle. The third pillar notes that meaningful youth engagement should be anchored in genuine shared value partnerships between young people and adults. These should be based on a series of shared values and mutual respect. In the research, all youth key informant interviews and focus groups underscored the importance of co-leadership and co-decision-making in promoting meaningful youth engagement partnerships. 90% of implementers and 80% of funders through their key informant interviews concurred with this. In focus groups, participants particularly shared the struggles to be seen as valuable partners in decision-making and about engagements that are perceived as tokenistic or ad hoc. 85% of youth survey responses agreed that trust and reciprocity were critical aspects of their partnership with adults. The key criteria under this pillar include shared value creation, equality, joint work, and the establishment of common norms. An indicator representing this pillar would be the proportion of young people in the program who believe they gained a net benefit from the partnership between adult and youth leaders at each project stage. For example, collective learning and capabilities, networking, connecting, and catalyzing action, the weight of the actions taken, social and political capital, and the authority to create new norms and standards for youth employment. Through this pillar, we hope to see the outcome of a genuine shared value partnership between youth and adults from funder, implementers, and other pertinent organizations, which underpins and leverages the efforts of all youth involved in the program. The fourth pillar focuses on the need to move away from participatory approaches that merely consult young people as beneficiaries and towards engagement approaches that recognize young people as actors. In the research, while more than half of implementers, approximately 60%, and 53% of funders acknowledge the need to consult young people at the onset of the program, They also brought up the importance of involving youth in the decision-making processes throughout. Moreover, nearly all funders, 93% of funders, including 90% of implementers and 90% of youth, discussed the significance of engaging youth throughout the program lifecycle. Earlier engagement could potentially impact program quality. At the same time, 70% of youth key informants felt it was necessary to expand the roles that young people played in such programs. This was echoed by youth survey respondents who believe that youth should be involved in the following program stages. Planning at 86%, 85% felt the need for youth to be meaningfully engaged in design, 87% in implementation, 85% in monitoring and evaluation, and 82% in decision-making or governance. You can see the theme there that all of these phases are of equal importance. The research participants also emphasized how youth roles in the program should align with the developmental abilities of the young people involved. And this was discussed by all youth key informant interviews and focus groups, and also noted heavily by implementers and funders. The key criteria for this pillar includes using a rights-based approach with a strong emphasis on the right of citizens, including young people, to participate as a prerequisite, or claiming other rights, including social and economic rights, that our interventions and programming is age and developmentally appropriate, and that involvement is continuous. An indicator here would be the percentage of young people from youth employment programs who report playing an active role in the program continuously, for example, across the full project lifecycle involving design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, and that we are disaggregating that by age, gender, and disability, and that young people are involved in a minimum of 3 of those project lifecycle stages. The outcome for this pillar would be that the program ensures that the involvement of young people is rights-based, appropriate to their developmental abilities, incremental, and continuous. The last pillar is focused on meaningful youth engagement, which is considered to be deeply connected to actual opportunities to exert power. Most key informant interviews revealed that youth contributions are relevant beyond the world of work and pointed to associations with multidimensional empowerment, where young people are empowered and become agents of empowerment for others beyond the program lifecycle. The key criteria here include personal empowerment, the community level impact, and system level influencing. We would be looking to measure the percentage of young people in the program who report feelings of increased agency and or personal growth with regard to the world of work as a result of their pursuit of the objectives of the youth employment program. The outcome we would be seeking is, through a youth employment program, the young participants grow empowered, enhance project quality, and youth employment outcomes that influence labor market developments in favor of the program's targeted youth. Next slide, please. So this is our roadmap. This is the journey that we hope everyone will begin to take or continue to take. This roadmap provides a step-by-step guide to the key phases of youth engagement programs. It recognizes that users will pass through various points along their meaningful engagement journey. And the roadmap includes general guidance and maps out milestones designed to help funders and implementers embed meaningful youth engagement into the various stages of their program. The roadmap considers that all the pillars we just discussed are equally important and mutually reinforcing, and maintains that meaningful youth engagement depends on the achievement of all of the pillars. However, we recognize funders and implementers are characterized by different capacities, arrangements, and program contexts. So to operationalize meaningful youth engagement, funders and implementers may have to tailor their approaches and determine what can be realistically achieved within each pillar in their life cycle stages. Next slide, please. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into each of the stages of the roadmap, the first being the planning phase. So the roadmap provides guidance on how to prepare resources, establish processes, and documentation in the planning phase. In the vision identification milestone, where identifying the role of youth representatives will be most crucial. We need to clearly define and communicate that role will optimize the representative's intervention across the program cycle. In addition, it's important to map out youth organizations and civil society networks, which will be involved in later phases of the program. Writing these partnerships and engagements between implementers and youth into a memorandum of understanding or similar document will help to formalize and institutionalize the engagement. In the governance phase, the roadmap offers practical guidance in providing youth representation in the governance boards of youth employment programs. So youth involved in governance boards are provided with necessary mentorship and capacity support to allow them to participate meaningfully in board discussions, which will result in more strategic decision involving youth interventions. And aside from increasing their competencies, we need to assure proper youth representation and inclusive resources, as are highlighted in the roadmap there. In the design phase, the roadmap highlights the need for implementers to develop the project's theory of change with a youth participatory research lens. And this is done first by identifying the participatory research needs of all youth staff, conducting a labor market research, conducting power mapping of the world of work across youth groups and issues. All of these preparatory activities will help develop the theory of change, which then allows for greater assessment of the project across the life cycle. Pardon me. Next slide, please. The next three phases begin with the implementation phase, and this roadmap highlights the importance of having youth team members be active participants in this stage. Youth members will be trained to work alongside their adult counterparts in implementing youth employment programs. It also emphasizes the necessity of increasing the skills of youth program teams by consolidating technical and managerial skills by providing ample resources. The monitoring phase recommends that young people's feedback be monitored continuously across the project. This allows the implementers to adapt necessary implementation adjustments based on actual and continuous observations. Youth employment program improvements are also linked to youth monitoring efforts, and improving these will allow the adjustment of the project quality and trajectory over the course of its life cycle. Lastly, the evaluation phase. So the roadmap recommends the inclusion of youth representatives for in-depth and contextual evaluation of the project. The roadmap recommends preparation and launching of a youth participatory youth employment program evaluation. And in order to do that, it's important to provide sufficient time for youth representatives to provide inputs into the evaluation. Dissemination of the lessons learned for youth participation also helps in showcasing success and encourages future youth employment programs to implement meaningful youth engagement. The next two slides offer some suggestions for funders who are at the beginning stage of integration of meaningful youth employment, followed by those who might be at more of an intermediate stage. So at the beginning stage, we would suggest that funders and other stakeholders can avoid perpetuating negative and harmful perceptions of young people by minding how they refer to youth in their program. So stigmatization might arise from the use of negative discourse and attitudes regarding young people, such as referring to them as problems to be fixed. So this is particularly important to youth in high-risk situations or environments. For example, youth ex-combatants, adolescent girls, youth with disabilities, who may otherwise be perceived as dangerous or dependent. Our research noted that the importance of positive relationships when dealing with major market players whose help is needed to promote youth engagement in youth employment programs. They highlighted the impact of perceived difficulties in intergenerational relationships unless there was a purposeful strategy by donor organizations to de-risk this segment of the financial market, both through donors' discourse and actions. Respondents also recommended that the approaches used to tackle this challenge should be intentional and proactive, with the aim of unlocking dialogue and opening up avenues to partnerships for those youth who are most likely to be excluded from engagement opportunities in youth employment programs. The second point notes that young people and funders stated during the research their openness and readiness to allow for meaningful youth engagement with their inner operations is critical for kickstarting the organization's youth engagement journeys. Institutions need to hold honest dialogues about how comfortable they are with the idea of intergenerational cooperation in youth engagement processes and strategies. The key to making it all work lies in the leadership of genuinely committed and influential youth engagement champions within these organizations. Champions can help cultivate their organization's receptiveness to new internal participation mechanisms by disseminating information and including examples of successful youth partnerships based on their own firsthand experience. The third step is that in order to measure effectiveness, results, and value of meaningfully engaging youth in youth employment programs, a recommendation from funders is to partner with and learn from other organizations that are already practicing meaningful youth engagement in their own programming. So lessons learned from these partnerships may also serve as an opportunity for funders to assess the challenges as well as the best practices of their partner organizations in implementing MYE or meaningful youth engagement. Depending on the comfort level of partner organizations, important information for starting up meaningful youth engagement, such as identifying funding models, institutional designs that accommodate youth, and other preparatory steps that enable the smooth institutionalization of meaningful youth engagement, will be very valuable resources that can help the funder prepare for its own initiatives. Further, the partner may provide step-by-step guidance and support to the funder when initiating meaningful youth engagement. The fourth step highlights the importance of embedding meaningful youth engagement in organizations' institutional approaches and involving youth representatives in internal decision-making procedures at the senior executive level. Such mechanisms allow for maximum youth participation in the funder-implementer organizational structure and processes, where these critical decisions are made regarding strategic funding priorities and programmatic priorities, but they're typically made without youth presence. So many youth employment funders and implementers felt youth participation should be deeply ingrained in their organizations and experienced by the leaders at the highest possible level, well before youth engagement programs are conceived. They noted that successful, meaningful youth engagement, institutional processes, and journeys naturally involve an intrinsic, ongoing, and permanent relationship between the adult funder or implementer and relevant young people, and that this relationship should be situated well beyond the limits of a youth employment program life cycle. It should become a part of their way of working. The fifth step noted there is the availability of resources to support funders' efforts to promote MYE internally and to embed youthful voices into their institutions. Considering the higher costs of including marginalized youth, funders should also prepare to redirect institutional investments towards mainstreaming youth voices throughout their organization and aim to reach youth diversity and inclusion milestones. This process requires organizations to internalize the concept of MYE and to be clear about the mechanisms through which they will fund their actions to support internal change that will help them achieve meaningful youth engagement. Funders should also agree that meaningful youth engagement must be given high priority on their institutional or strategic agendas. And this means they need to understand how meaningful youth engagement will serve and support not only their own operational models, but the wider economy. This business case may vary depending on the organization. And for those who are at the intermediate stage of their journey, our talking points here focus on internalizing change. So staff members need to become familiar with the practice of meaningful youth engagement in their institution. And this will help sustain the efforts focused on organizational structures, systems, and policies. To build staff capacity, funders may need to develop an MYE awareness raising and practice curriculum that supports institutional mainstreaming, that includes measures of institutional level outcomes, including key performance indicators. Secondly, funders at the more advanced stages of their journeys typically find that youth-adult partnerships facilitate the process of transformation to MYE. In particular, through youth organizations, a more diverse, representative pool of youthful talent can be recruited to participate in strategic decisions regarding funding, policies, and programming priorities. Youth organizations could therefore effectively complement the work of youth who belong on institutional executive boards. Lastly, we would be looking for continuous foundational research, which is needed to further refine the parameters and value of good practices in organizational youth engagement, particularly to see what works and does not work in engaging youth with funders, within funders and implementer structures, processes, strategic funding priorities, and programmatic orientations. I'm going to stop talking now and pass it over to my colleague, Alexandra Robinson, who represents ISIC International, which is a global platform for young people to explore and develop their leadership potential. Alexandra is also the co-chair of the Youth Advisory Panel, which is a council of 10 youth-led organizations from each region across the globe that was convened to provide input on the roadmap project design and ensure that the engagement and perspectives of young people were reflected in the report. So Alex, over to you to hear directly from a young person's perspective in terms of the importance of meaningful youth engagement.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. And hello to everyone that's been able to join us today. I'm really happy to have the chance to be with you and to share a youth perspective on this roadmap. So as Kate mentioned, I am one of 10 organizations, representing one of 10 organizations that together made the Youth Advisory Panel of this roadmap. And I'd like to just take a moment to recognize those organizations because their contribution in giving feedback on project design, ensuring the perspectives and engagement of young people throughout this roadmap, it was really integral to the success of this roadmap. And so I'd like to express gratitude to these organizations, which perhaps you know of or you've worked with in your own work, and also to the countless other young people that participated in all of our data collection processes throughout this roadmap, whether that be interviews or answering surveys. I think it's really important to highlight that the youth perspective was really included from conception until the creation and launch process of this roadmap. And that really makes this a valuable tool to know that youth perspectives were really considered. And because of that, I'd like to bring a youth perspective on the roadmap itself. I believe from Kate's overview already, you can already see how actionable this roadmap is. And I would imagine that maybe you have some thoughts in your mind right now about, based on where your organization is at, what are some of your first steps or first initiatives to better improve your meaningful youth engagement? But there are a few that I wanted to highlight just from the youth perspective on what we'd seen and observed from experience and from this roadmap creation process. So taking us to the next slide, we've got some recommendations. And I'd like to start speaking as a youth organization representative to other youth organizations. I think the responsibility sometimes falls on the shoulders of young people to show what they can bring to the So a recommendation here is to actively participate and document the conditions of youth engagement throughout program life cycles in youth engagement and youth employment programs. It's really important that young people can show where their contribution made a difference in achieving program outcomes and where their contribution could have been further capitalized on to better meet program outcomes, to really show what worked and where the gaps were. Youth can build trust in their participation and their partnership in programs by understanding the business case for meaningful youth engagement, really understanding how their participation and meaningful engagement of young people means that program outcomes are more likely to be achieved. In an ideal world, it's the responsibility of all parties, all stakeholders in youth employment programs to understand why meaningful youth engagement is good business. But there are real world gaps in a lot of current programming around meaningfully engaging young people. And youth have the opportunity, by using shared language and documenting their own participation, to start to bridge that gap. And then moving to funders, investing early in youth capacity building really benefits the full program lifecycle. And that's something that I in particular really remember from one of our focus group discussions in the creation of this roadmap, speaking with a group of young women, speaking about how discouraging it was to continue to participate in programs where they were told that they were partners or that they were intended to be meaningfully engaged, but funding didn't match that. There was not funding that matched that promise, and it really excluded more marginalized youth or young people that they knew would have been able to improve the program. And so that early investment in building capacity, building access to the program by funders, it really sets the full program lifecycle up for success. And then also partnerships initiated by funders can really signal to youth organizations and also to implementers a true commitment to youth engagement. So partnerships with implementers that have a solid track record of meaningful youth engagement, or partnerships with youth organizations and youth leaders. and really partnerships, not consultancies or just seeing youth again as those ideal beneficiaries, but partnerships that allow young people to have a say throughout the program lifecycle, and especially in that initiation phase. And then finally, recommendations for implementers from the youth perspective include understanding and communicating really transparently and proactively the role of young people, that it's going to be possible throughout the full program lifecycle, from planning all the way to monitoring and evaluating youth employment programs, and communicating where there are really strong opportunities for youth participation and engagement, and communicating where they're not. Really establishing trust by being upfront about where youth can participate, and also using that to establish trust that programs will improve in the future. Establishing trust that when young people give feedback, when they share that documentation of their experience, that it's going to be used to iterate future programming. I think that's also really important, and something that we heard from young people is a sense of trust that future programs will improve. Young people are willing to give things repeated effort, willing to be part of those future iterations if they have a sense of confidence that there will be improvement. And implementers have a unique role in building that confidence by using the common language of the roadmap. Speaking to young people with the language of this roadmap, I really believe makes it so much more accessible to youth partners. By building their capacity with input from funders, allowing them to use a shared language about what actually youth engagement means. No gray areas, no miscommunications. This roadmap gives us a solid foundation to stand on together as stakeholders, and that starts to build that trust. And that trust is a two-way street, but all of these individual stakeholders, youth organizations, funders, implementers, our private sector partners, all have different opportunities in their roles to take that first step and show a true commitment to meaningful youth engagement. And so I really think these are some of the recommendations I'd highlight, but wherever your organization's at, there's a recommendation for you in this roadmap. And so wrapping things up with this final slide, I've taken a sentiment directly from the roadmap. It really resonates with me, nothing about them without them. Youth need to be involved throughout the full life cycle of youth employment programs, and we know that this improves these programs. And whether or not in the past your organization implemented programs, perhaps that had insufficient engagement of youth, and whether or not outcomes were achieved, it can't be taken for granted that outcomes in the future will continue to be achieved. Meaningful youth engagement is an important key to a successful and a sustainable and an iterable, reproducible program for engaging young people in employment programs. And so funders, implementers, youth organizations, and again, our private sector partners really must see this as an urgent task. And so representing myself as a youth leader and the youth organizations that were part of this roadmap and all of the youth that gave their time to the findings of this roadmap, I'd like to just remind you on our behalf that this is an urgent task for all of us. So thank you so much, and I'll pass back the mic.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for reminding us all of the urgency. I couldn't agree more, and very much appreciate the honesty of your feedback and a clear call to action for all of us. I'm pleased to pass on to our next speaker, who many of you probably know. Mike McCabe is the agency's senior advisor on youth at USAID. In his role, Mike supports the integration of youth and emerging leader programming across all USAID bureaus and missions. Mike has 30 plus years of experience in international development, including his work with UNICEF, the Peace Corps, the Inter-American Foundation, YSA, and many other organizations. So Mike, over to you.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we could get the camera on there. Start video. All right, thank you so much to Alexandra and to Kate. If we were all together, I wish we were all 200 of us from around the world, this would be the moment where we would say we need a stretch. So consider this your Zoom stretch or your Zumba. So I need everybody, wherever you are. I can see through the camera to all around the world in Kenya, and I see people over in Honduras, and I see people in New York. I need everybody to stand up, stretch that body of yours, move it around. We can see you. You can't see us, but we can see you. All right, stretch it out. This is your Zumba stretch, and have a seat. All right, we have to keep the blood moving here because this is important stuff, and we're moving into that part where we really want to hear from you. What are those questions that need to be resolved in order to make this roadmap really applicable? And I want to really start with a thanks to all those who were part of that collective impact effort, Plan International and the City Foundation and the Youth Employment Funders Group, as well as all the young leaders who were consulted to bring their insights into this. And so what I want to do is just briefly talk from a funder's perspective in USAID to talk about the journey that we've been on to try and put into practice youth engagement more effectively in the design of our youth employment program. So if we could go to that next slide, I want to start with lesson one, which is if you don't succeed, ask the youth again and learn. So I was what's called the chief of party for one of our youth employment programs in Central America, working in gang impacted communities. And we had done a great effort to develop evidence-tested curriculum for workforce preparedness. We had worked with the private sector, especially in the hospitality industry, for 3-month job placements. And we had a lot of young people motivated and going through the process. But after the first month of our activity, where they were in their job placement, we saw a higher than expected level of dropout by some of the young people. And we went out immediately to interview them and say, why at this point, after going through the training and getting into your job placement, did you drop out? So 2 things came out. First, one that I think all of us could relate to. When they got their first stipended check, they were like, wow, all those hours of work, and that's all it adds up to. I think all of us can identify with that reality that when we work and then we get that first paycheck and it's not as big as we expect, especially when the gang is offering you alternatives. But more importantly was when we dug down in the dialogues with these young people, was they said, you know what, I have other issues going on where not only is the gang trying to draw me back in, but I have domestic violence going on in my household. I have health issues going on with my boyfriend or girlfriend. And we realized that we hadn't adequately addressed the multiple issues that young people are going through as they're trying to fully become resilient and thrive in their environment. And so that allowed us to pivot and add in new components of strengthening the mentoring. There we go. To strengthen the mentoring component, to strengthen some of the other sectoral components of this. And that dramatically improved our outcomes after that month. So we had to ask, learn, pivot, and improve. And that's really what the part of this roadmap's about, but it's also about making sure we've done that much earlier on so we don't end up in that situation. The second example is our TVET SAVE program, which is in Nicaragua, where we worked to strengthen the technical and vocational training institutions that were serving youth from at-risk communities of the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. And we tried to both improve those livelihoods and prevent violence in these areas. And the reason it has worked so well to date is the creation of youth and adult working groups across all phases of learning and the implementation of it. So having these youth adult working groups in the community or municipal levels that were looking at market demand and looking at aspects of the technical education components that were to be developed, and then looking at that connection really helped us design projects that connected both with the private sector as well as with youth-led. I want to go to this next slide and talk about my lesson 2, which is this formula of, and it's a little bit long, evidence plus guidance plus a good mechanism plus engagement can equal success. And I think probably the roadmap does a better job with its 5 pillars and breaking out the milestones along the road. But for us at USAID, the roadmap is definitely going to complement our other design tools that are going to allow us to do much better in our long-term investment in youth employment programs. So our recent education strategy over the past few years has pivoted our focus on what good investment in life skills, soft skills, social emotional skills, as well as workforce readiness skills look like. Combine that with how we look at our employment framework, which is looking at the evidence of what sort of interventions really work in ensuring that young people end up in actual jobs or improved income. And then combining that with some of our recent research on workforce development and soft skills that we've done through YP2LE and with the Youth Employment Funders Group. All of those combined to give us the knowledge base, but then making sure that we're bringing in that voice of young people and their insights. So some of our new mechanisms, such as Youth Excel, are focused on youth-led implementation research. I'm excited about this because it's the first time we've really invested in youth-led implementation research. And so partners such as the Biz Nation in Colombia with Karen Carvajalino, who has created a self-sustaining platform to connect young entrepreneurs from low-income environments to the resources they need to be much more effective, to understand how they then partner with other entrepreneurs and companies in Colombia and throughout Latin America has been important. But also mechanisms that are looking at the positive youth development approach between not just the employment side, but these other components that I mentioned in my opening example. So getting better funding mechanisms has allowed us as a funder to then look at the positive youth development components, which central to positive youth development is effective engagement of youth as partners and youth adult partnerships, and all of those kind of 5 pillars that are standing out in this roadmap. And it's showing returns already, because what we've been able to do through that engagement and Youth Lead starter kits on our youthlead.org platform, we're seeing results. So just in the past 2 years, the number of our missions reporting improvements in youth soft skills and workforce readiness skills has gone from 330,000 to 610,000 young people, just over from 2019 to 2020. I want to go to the next slide for a second and talk about a few other lessons learned about engaging internal stakeholders. And for me, this is a big issue for any product that comes out. We always have to start with that question about, how do we make sure that the internal stakeholders are going to adapt and promote this? We've all been there. We've created lots of products, but if people are not applying that or don't know how to apply it, we run a big risk. So first, it's about making the time to get the results you want. And I'm speaking very honestly as a funder, as a USAID employee, that we're all under a lot of time constraints. Whether you're an implementing partner, you're a young person who's working and studying, or you're a donor. But if we don't make the time to apply the components of this roadmap and figure out where the different job aids are to allow our staff to actually use the roadmap, we're not going to get the results that we're talking about here with the roadmap. So part of that is knowing who and how to engage. And that was brought up as one of the first pillars, that youth diversity and representation. One of the things I'm really happy about is how we've moved on the use of youth assessments by USAID missions. In the past 2 years, we've done more youth assessments engaging youth, community-based organizations, private sector partners than we've ever done in our previous history. So getting that dialogue going way before we even designed the project has been key. But the hard part for our staff is selecting young people who are representative of the diversity of experiences and identities of young people. And that's where we need to work together, is through platforms like youthlead.org, through networks of young people. How do we make sure we're hearing the diversity of voices to design that in? Second, we need to really learn to talk the language of each other and the partners. So that means donors talking with youth, talking to private sector, youth talking to private sector, and really making sure we understand that. So when I was working in Panama, we brought private sector leaders and some of the top leaders of the companies in Panama to meet with young people who were either leaving gangs or were living in very gang-impacted communities. And we had to work with both sides to get them to listen to each other and understand what they meant when they were talking to each other, so that they could understand how they could work together. And so part of that is also understanding the timing of cycles. USAID, you all know, works at somewhat of a slow cycle because we're a large donor agency. Some community groups can really work and pivot quickly. One of the things we found in working with the private sector, and that I hope ties into how we build this into utilizing the roadmap, is understanding the program cycle and the funding cycle of donors and of the private sector, and then utilizing that to do the timing of what it will take to apply the roadmap and do that together. So in Panama, as I was mentioning that story, we were working to support a network of 29 youth centers. And we had companies supporting years 2 and 3 of that and we covered year one. Why? Because we knew that the companies could not put in money in year one because their funding cycle was so long out that we needed to cover that. And then they could put in to cover years 2 and 3, but they got recognition for being engaged throughout it. So understanding the timing of youth organizations and of donors and of private sector and public sector is really key to the roadmap. And then finally, if you go to the next slide, I just want a few tips for fellow funders as we think about how we make this roadmap more than just another document out there. So my favorite quote is, if a promising practice guide is created in the woods and no one is there to read it or apply it, did it really make a sound or a difference? And as I said, we all create the error of creating documents before thinking about what is our social norms and adaptation strategy. And I'm challenging each and every one of us to think about, how do you take the executive summary of the roadmap? How do we take the section on milestones? How do we take the overall document and think about how we're going to share it with 2 people back at our organizations to make them understand what's different about the roadmap? What is the roadmap going to get us if we take that additional time to apply it? And we have to apply a social norms, behavior change strategy to this, because it makes a difference to whether a USAID staffer is going to use it in Kenya or in Bangladesh. It makes a difference as to whether an implementing partner takes it seriously or uses it just to kind of say they did it, but not really with all seriousness. And it's important for how young people are adapting some of the recommendations that Alexandra just made about how they play a role in holding everyone accountable in the process. Finally, we need to build the roadmap into our new procurement guidelines, our designs, our new partnership initiative, or our request for proposals. And I think here's where USAID has some really interesting opportunities. In our co-creation process that we've been rolling out with the new partnership initiative, this can be a key part of making sure that the principles, the pillars, and the milestones are tied into that. And that also ties into how we use global development alliances or other partnerships, for example, with the travel and tourism industry or the digital tech partners, and say that this is our approach to how we get better results. We don't want to leave unrealized results on the table by not having this good engagement of young people in designing much more sustainable and targeted interventions. So in conclusion, this is a collective impact product and effort. It's also a collective impact challenge. And the roadmap, we know, can improve outcomes if we make the time to use it, socialize it with our colleagues, and apply it. So it's a simple issue of, do we want to change our existing patterns to get this better outcome for in terms of youth employment and youth engagement outcomes? I hope the answer is yes, but it will take an effort by each and every one of us to make this roadmap a reality. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Alex and Kate, everyone who's presented. As Mike had introduced us to before his presentation, now we would kind of like to hear from you. I know we've heard a lot of information today. It's been a pretty great overview of the roadmap itself. But we like to take a moment to turn back to our audience before we go to Q&A with a brief 2-question poll to kind of get us thinking about the roadmap in general, and kind of thinking about some of the points that were made throughout these presentations. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. And let's see here. If you can't see it on your screen, I'll go ahead and read the questions for you. But you should have the poll launch up on your screen now. It's just briefly 2 questions. The first question is, using phases from the roadmap as a guide, where would you like to strengthen youth engagement in your own work? And I'll go ahead and read out those phases for you, just for those of you who cannot see the poll. It's planning, governance, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So you can go ahead, if you can't see the poll or you can't partake, feel free to answer in the chat as well. The second question is what actionable next steps will you take to use or promote the use of the roadmap? So on here, we just have some suggested items, but you can also answer in the chat something else that you've been thinking. Obviously, the first is download the roadmap and read it. Secondly, on here, we have apply lessons from the roadmap to future work. Share the roadmap with others, attend future events to gather more information, or use the roadmap to encourage youth engagement in your own community. So I'm gonna let the voting go on for just a few more minutes. I might actually just share my screen with you. So for those of you who cannot see it, you can go ahead and see some of the results. Looks like we've got about 70% of our votes in, so I'll give you guys about 20 more seconds. And then after this, we'll move on to Q&A. So please feel free as you're thinking through these questions. If you have questions for our presenters, we'll welcome them back here in just a moment, and we'll do some Q&A. I've been collecting some of your questions to pose back to them. So we've got about 70% voted. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and show everyone the results here. So you should see up on your screen the results of some of the voting that we've done. So we see that planning has come in as the top choice for where you would like to strengthen youth engagement in your work in accordance with the phases from the roadmap. See the design and implementation are very close seconds as well. And some actionable items, which is right on the point that Mike was making earlier. What are we going to do after this webinar? And most of you, it's 71% to apply lessons from the roadmap to future work, download and read the roadmap as well. And looks like we're pretty much tied for the last three, is sharing, future events, and encouraging youth engagement in your community. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing the results here. And as I do that, we'll move on to Q&A. So I'd like to invite our presenters back on to go through some of the questions that we've received in the chat. So it looks like we've got Kate and Mike. I think your camera is not working, but we'll see if we can get you on there.
Yeah.
It's okay. We know you're here.
That it's working, but for some reason it's not coming up. Yep.
Awesome. So I've been collecting some questions in the chat, and so please feel free to continue placing questions in the chat. I see a couple of hands up as well. For those of you with your hands up, if you would place your questions in the chat, that would be super helpful. But we'll go ahead and start with some of the questions that we've received earlier. So this is from John at UNICEF. He has a question. What are some of the key constraints, such as decisions on budget allocations, do funders and implementers face in realizing youth engagement in their own institutions? There you are, Mike. Welcome. So I don't know if we want to, I'm going to leave it open-ended, so please feel free to jump in and answer these questions. Again, that was key constraints funders and implementers face realizing.
Yeah, I think there's a number of people on this call who could speak to that.
Yeah.
I think, a couple of things I was trying to highlight that are key constraints. First and foremost is, we work in somewhat artificial timelines for activities. And, when you think about a 3-year or a 5-year period, and then the timeline of getting that project ready, sometimes it seems tremendously long. And during that long ramp up to a release of a call for proposals, that's where we have to be having this process and the roadmap working. So the constraints, I think, just summarizing back on my previous points, are a little bit knowing which young people and what networks at a country level we're trying to reach out to, and making sure that it's really representative of the target group that we're trying to work with is key. And where do we find them? And I think we're getting better at that through doing youth assessments and landscape analyses, and leveraging youth lead networks on youthlead.org. I think the other one is somewhat inertia. We have a system of how we design activities. We often say that we have consulted, and but just doing a few focus groups is not necessarily the same as applying the roadmap. And so making sure that people understand, do we get better returns on investment? Is the cost benefit analysis really that much better if we do this? And being able to show that through concrete examples where it works, within USAID to other USAID missions, with DFID to other DFID, contacts across the board in the Youth Employment Funders Group, that's going to make a difference. It has to be shown that we're getting better outcomes, and implementing partners can help us by measuring those outcomes. So,
thank you, Mike. Kate, did you want to
Yeah,
add?
I would just add, sorry, that there's, often a bit of a misalignment between meaningful youth engagement and the priorities of, the funders and implementers. And so having those open and honest discussions is key at the very beginning, and starting to embed key principles of meaningful youth engagement into the way the actual organization operates. Otherwise, it's very difficult to advocate for resources to be moved over to support MYE. There have to be these foundational discussions, and really integrating it into every part of how the organization operates will then, I think, open some doors to allocating resources, identifying staff, et cetera.
And I guess this is almost a leading into the next question. There were a couple of questions in the chat similar to each other about the application and understanding of the roadmap in preparing not just youth, but adults to be more involved in the governance process. We had a couple of the methodology, how is it orienting the adult population to further engage with youth?
I can share a quick example from my experience at Plan. So we have dedicated youth seats on our board of directors. So young people are fully integrated into our governance structures. But in order for us to do that, we quickly recognized that our focus and our energies in terms of training needed to be on our adult board members. That young people tend to naturally know how to work with adults much more effectively because they do it in every aspect of their life every day, from school to their families to employment. And so we dedicated resources and time to do comprehensive trainings with our board members so they could understand how to more effectively work with young people, what it means to share power, talking about adultism and tokenism. So often I think we focus our efforts on training youth and getting them ready. But your point is very well taken, that we need to put an equal amount of time and resources, perhaps even more so, on making sure that adults in the enabling environment are ready to welcome these empowered, outspoken, passionate, energetic youth into partnerships with them. But with looking to Alex and Mike, I'm sure you have experiences with this as well.
Alex?
Of course, I could echo what Kate is saying as well. I think that's extremely true, that the training that we do needs to speak to all of our stakeholders. How can youth engage? What's their role going to be? But how can adults work with them as well? And I think I would just add on that so much of this work needs to be done in the beginning of our programming, at the start, to really set proper expectations. Because when it's done up front, it really levels the playing field. It can be iterated throughout program lifecycle, but of course it can look like we're coming in to really have maybe too heavy of a hand to steer the direction of young people in their participation if it comes in later in the program. When it's really up front, it's transparent, it's communicated. I think it levels the playing field and lets everyone know the role they can play, and not lead to them feeling chastised or put in their place later on when they weren't engaging appropriately in the program. So I'd recommend thinking of that from the start.
Yeah, just building off Alexandra's point, and seeing a comment in the chat from Jack Boyson, who has been a long time youth expert. about what tools do we have for that. So one of the ways we've been doing it at USAID is we have rolled out a positive youth development training for our staff, and we've trained about 600 of our staff in the in-person training, which is multi-day training, as well as we have a PYD 101 and 201, which you can find on youthpower.org, and it's designed also for USAID staff to really create a baseline of fundamentals of, making the case for effective youth engagement. So part of it is professional development. The other part of it is, as I think Jack asked about, is there a tool that helps, organizations really think about what good, effective youth engagement looks like? And so the Youth Programming Assessment Tool, or the YPAT, was developed about a year ago, and it's now available in multiple languages. And it's a self-assessment tool that any organization can use that follows the Positive Youth Development Framework and really allows any organization, whether it's a ministry or a private sector or a donor or a community organization, to say, how well are we doing on effective youth engagement? And that can start that dialogue that then allows the roadmap to guide them into building this into their designs more effectively.
Thank you, guys. Another kind of common question that we have been seeing come through the chat, and maybe you could address through the development of the roadmap, was how are conflict affected youth and areas affected, and how was that incorporated into the planning and rollout and kind of processing of this roadmap? And I say conflict, but we've also talked about vulnerable populations in the questions as well. So I guess looking at it through that lens, how was that taken into consideration as the roadmap was developed, and how do we take that forth with the roadmap?
Sure, I can start, and we'll turn it over to others. So it's a great question, and it's one that I think we'll have to continue to keep front and center, as this is just a start at building this evidence base, and this is a proposed model that we'll need to continue to test and adapt and iterate. But conflict affected youth, really any vulnerable and marginalized youth, those were discussions that we had early on in terms of how to engage them, make sure that their voices were included meaningfully in this program, how best to access them. There are also a number of constraints that we faced as we were doing this research in the midst of COVID. And so a lot of our typical outreach mechanisms were not available to us. And so that's also noted in the paper that, there are certain constraints and challenges that we had to work within, and working with those who are most marginalized or who don't have, ready access. That was something, that we struggled with throughout the research, and did the best we could to ensure that their voices were heard, either through direct participation, through engagement with their peers, to make sure that their opinions are reflected in this paper. But as the conflict situation changes, as vulnerabilities continue to change, it's something that all of us as implementers and funders and youth need to keep sort of at the forefront, making sure that we don't lose that important perspective and those really important voices that often kind of get maybe pushed to the side because they're harder to identify, harder to engage for a number of reasons, particularly in our current environment. But Mike, I see you're also off mute.
Yeah, no, that I was mentioning that experience in Panama where we brought the CEOs of some companies to meet with young people living in a place called Curundú, which at that time had the highest homicide rate in the country. And they were afraid to go in there, and yet we really wanted this dialogue to happen between them and the young people. And what was fascinating about it was having them hear from young people how when they go in to apply for a job, when they put their address, they know that they're going to be redlined out of being able to even get the job. So discussing with them about redlining, the fact that they would all lie and put an address of another relative in a neighborhood that wasn't as considered as dangerous, just so that they would even get a chance to apply for a job, was important. So again, looking at the different ways that we are working early on to bring together the voices of the people who are in the design side, the people who might be responsible for where the jobs or the training might be, and the young people, especially in conflict environments, which are so much more complex, is important to bring into the whole, the milestones as we do it. I think there's modified milestones when we work in complex or conflict environments. Alexandra?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Kate and Mike have shared. And I'd echo a bit of what Kate mentioned, that we knew we were facing these constraints in the roadmap creation process, especially because this was done in COVID times. So some of those traditional channels for engaging youth maybe weren't there. And that was a conversation we had time and again, is all of the ways that the use of technology levels the playing field and creates more access to these programs because you can just log onto a computer, and all the ways that doesn't, how many youth are left out when it's access to technology. And so you can't make those broad statements that it's so much more accessible now because you just log on to Zoom, or we're not accessing youth at all because we're online. I'd say something we relied on that I would encourage everyone to keep in mind is youth networks. So how can you find a youth organization or youth network that can pipeline to other youth? You know, maybe your organization might have lost some of your traditional channels for engaging those vulnerable or marginalized youth, but there are still youth networks still operating, still engaging. And so how can you find those that are your most powerful pipelines? And you can nurture those over time, that hopefully, even as we transition to this new normal, it's not going to establish a new normal where marginalized populations are further marginalized. So finding those right networks.
And we're just about done with Q&A. I want to be cognizant of time for everyone. I appreciate all the wonderful questions that have come in. I want to also say that there have been a lot, and I apologize for not being able to get to all of them in the time that we have today. We will have, at the end of this webinar, we'll share some information on additional webinars upcoming this week that you can join. So please do keep that in mind and stay on. I wanted to ask one more question quickly. It's kind of a dual part question from a couple of people. The indicators mentioned for each of the 5 pillars are mostly self-reported by youth. Wondering why the team made the decision to structure these indicators as youth reported. And I guess, where did that idea spur from? And if there were case studies of youth engagement that were also referenced in these 5 pillars and building them out.
So I can kick us off for this one. Yes, there are lots of case studies. There are case studies for every pillar. So you'll be able to go in and read and see what these pillars look like in action from a variety of funders and implementers. So you'll easily find them. They're called out throughout the paper. In terms of the indicators, I gave just one indicator, per pillar. We have a number of them. And the ones that I noted, a lot of them are, self-reported. We also wanted to include program level indicators that align with reporting expectations that we're aware of. And, the data points that we used are based on the data that's typically collected or requested from these programs. We also need to be mindful of the language that we use in the indicators so that we're not perpetuating other norms and stereotypes and misconceptions of young people. So there was a lot of thought into the indicators and how they were crafted. I may have just given too many and focused too many on those that are really youth driven, but there is a good mix in the paper. So I would encourage you to go in and take a look at all of the illustrative indicators that we're suggesting. So there is a good mix, I promise you, if that's a enticement to go in and read through the whole roadmap.
I would just add, whenever we're looking at metrics, we can only measure so many. There is a limit to how many you can put in. And so I appreciate that the roadmap has a lot of different ones that we can draw from. The important thing is that discussion between youth and the partners in any new activity to say, which are the ones that are going to teach us the most and allow us to learn and adapt as we're going through this activity. And then really focus on those and say, what are we hoping to learn? And will this metric allow us to learn that and then narrow down on that? But we have a smorgasbord of good metrics to draw from.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you guys for coming back on. I'm actually going to, as we sort of wrap things up here, and like I said, I apologize for not being able to get to all of the questions. There were some really good ones in there, so I encourage you to keep asking those questions, and we will provide some outlets for getting those answered later. But what I would like to do now is invite Dorothy back for a few quick closing remarks. If Dorothy, you could come back on, and then we will, before you step away and Dorothy is finished, we will be sharing out some more information, so please do stay on until the end of the webinar. But Dorothy, welcome back.
Thanks, Cole. I just want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists today for their insights and to the inspiration that I hope that today's discussion has brought to the sector. I think, there's certainly a bit more research that's probably needed and understanding as well, but I think that this is really a fantastic start and shows us that we have such a unique opportunity now to evolve how we engage with young people. So I certainly hope that this roadmap will help funders and stakeholders take additional steps towards that and to creating a more equitable youth employment field. So thanks again to everybody for joining. And I'll pass it back over to Cole, who has some information on how to stay engaged with this report on social and where to go to download the report and supporting documents.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. And thank you again, echoing Dorothy's remarks. Thank you so much for everyone joining today. So I wanted to quickly draw everyone's attention to the actual roadmap. So I am dropping the link into the chat now for everybody to go. This is the official launch page for the roadmap where you can download the roadmap. And that page is live today. So congratulations, it is up, out, and ready for everyone. As I said again, the link is in the chat, so please feel free to grab that and go over. For those of you listening, the link is www.planusa.org/youth-voices. I also wanted to draw everyone's attention to some upcoming webinars surrounding the roadmap. We have regional webinars, 2 of which are tomorrow. And then one we'll have on February 25th. These are youth-hosted webinars that will focus on defining meaningful youth engagement in youth employment programming. They'll take a deeper dive into the roadmap. And as I said, they are youth-led and youth-focused. So please take a look at these. I will drop the registration links for these webinars in the chat here shortly. But if you would like more information or you'd like to share, these links are also available on the event website. We'll also follow up with them as soon as we can. So I will go ahead and drop those links momentarily. And the last thing I wanted to point out for everyone is to please keep continuing the discussion. I think everyone made a very clear and important point that we need to continue to utilize and share and kind of take some actionable steps from the roadmap. So there is a hashtag to follow on social media, which invites funders, implementers, and youth to share their engagement experiences with the roadmap or just youth engagement experiences in general. The hashtag is Youth Voices. There are some prompts that we put here to kind of help start the discussion. And I'll go ahead and read those for you. So go ahead and feel free to answer any of these questions on social media. Why do youth voices matter? Why is meaningful youth engagement important to you? And how do you engage youth in program strategies and policies? Make sure to use the hashtag, like I said, Youth Voices. Tag Plan International and 3 of your friends on social media and kind of spread the word about the roadmap. I'm going to go ahead and place those links in here as well. And those are the links to the webinar in the chat, everyone. And I will go ahead and the hashtag is Youth Voices. Feel free to follow along on social media there. And with that, we are rounding out to 10:30, the end of our webinar today. So if I could invite everyone back and just say thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been an amazing journey being able to work alongside all of you and help with the launch of this roadmap. I hope everyone goes to the website, downloads the roadmap, shares on social media, and attends further events. Thank you to all of our presenters. I will stay on for just one moment longer. I will reshare some of those links. If you have any direct questions, feel free to message me in the chat. But thank you everyone so much for joining.
Great. Thanks so much, Cole. Thanks everyone for the great presentations. Super exciting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
So much,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Hey, Cole.